We were discussing this fanatical figure here. What's his name?
John Brown.
John Brown. And he's a man from Ohio, but he did considerable work in Kansas during the period of time known as Bleeding Kansas. All right. Does anybody remember something about why it's called Bleeding Kansas? Nobody remembers anything? Yeah, a lot of blood involved there, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Bleeding Kansas. I think that's cool. Anyway, so yeah, he goes because he is, what is he, pro-slavery, anti-slavery? What is he?
Anti-slavery.
He is very much abolitionist in nature. And he moves to Kansas from Ohio to get revenge against pro-slavery people who are trying to bring slavery into the Kansas territory. And he gets that revenge at Potawatomi or Potawatomi Creek. It's pronounced a couple different ways. Where he murderously falls upon them and hacks them to bits in their sleep with swords. This is not like 1300s Europe. This is like 1850s America. It's Kansas. Like the Wizard of Oz place, guys. People are being hacked to bits. Not that long ago. And they're doing this over an idea, a belief. So, you know, today we see violence in America over ideas. That's not a new idea. That's not something that fighting with one another over political differences is very American. All right? It's unfortunate, but it's a very American thing. Okay? So, Kansas tries to, you know, after John Brown, the leadership of Kansas tries to pass forth this thing called the Lecompton Constitution. And remember, this is all part of a scheme by Stephen A. Douglas. He was going to split Kansas and Nebraska, where Kansas would most likely be slave, Nebraska would most likely be free. But he's going to leave it up to what? Popular sovereignty. So he really doesn't care which way it goes. Stephen A. Douglas does. And he says, let the will of the people be heard. But the people of places like Missouri and Texas, when it comes time to vote about what they want, they go to Kansas. They're not even residents of there. They flood the territory. And that is why, and one of the things that they do when this happens is called the Lecompton Constitution. In Kansas, people were not really allowed to vote about whether or not they wanted slavery or not. That popular vote really never happened. What they were given is an opportunity to approve or deny this constitution called the Lecompton Constitution. And just so you know, it's made by Southern pro-slavery people. So it's kind of a tricky document. Remember, it's not about voting for or against slavery. It's voting for or against this Constitution. But whether it passes or not, there will be slavery in Kansas. That's how tricky this document is, because it's like if they pass this Lecompton Constitution, there would still be bondage in Kansas, because one of the provisions of the Constitution would protect the owners of slaves already. So even if they voted for the version of the Constitution that says slavery is not allowed, there's a clause in there that says if you already own slaves, you're allowed to keep them. So slavery would continue to exist in Kansas no matter what. No matter what. Okay? So at the time this was created, it was the president, you know, during most of the time of Bleeding Kansas was President Pierce. And then in 1857, President Buchanan takes over, and he may go down in history as one of America's worst presidents. Very pliable, under very strong Southern influence, and he kind of pulls his full weight of his administration behind this Lecompton Constitution. So the outcome of all this, popular sovereignty doesn't get its opportunity to work. Like, it fails. People's voices are not being heard. It's being cooked up by the people who want it to happen. So, even if they did try popular sovereignty, allowing the people of Kansas to vote, that's not fair either, because is it really the people of Kansas voting? Not when 20,000 people come from Missouri and Texas and slave states to cast their vote to have a pro-slavery constitution. So it's not fair. It's totally unfair. So President Buchanan does a lot to antagonize the political parties in America, to divide America even further. And he himself hopelessly divides the Democratic Party, causing, it's just another, we're building a bridge, guys. It's another plank in the bridge. On this side, we're not at war. On the other side of the bridge, we're at war. But we got to build a bridge to get there. Some planks are bigger than others, but this is another one. Buchanan's failure in Kansas. All right. Another big plank. This is a political cartoon. It's not, obviously not a photograph. But after, and really part of, Bleeding Kansas is when blood is literally spilled in the floor of the Senate. Like straight up Julius Caesar style, guys. Basically. And this happens in 1856. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts is this gentleman here who's, hang on, my pointer. This gentleman who's on the ground about to be beaten senseless. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, tall, imposing, very much a leader in the abolitionist movement. So he's anti-slavery. Highly educated man, but also very cold, humorless, intolerant, and egotistical. Typical senator. All right? So he, very well-spoken guy, and he basically begins to spout say really hurtful, demeaning, insulting things about particular senators and people from southern states, like South Carolina. He referred to anyone that supported slavery as a hireling picked from the drunken spew of the vomit of uneasy civilization. It's pretty low down. In other words, it's fighting words. Those are fighting words. He even goes so far as to insult a senator from South Carolina named Andrew Butler. And Andrew Butler was very well liked. He had Southern grace and manners. And Charles Sumner's this brash, egotistical, kind of a butthead from Massachusetts. So when Preston Brooks, who is this man right here, not Andrew Butler, this is Preston Brooks, who is a cousin of Andrew Butler, hears of this insult to not only his cousin, but his people and his state, he decided to take vengeance in his own hands. And this is something that's not entirely in his character. Ordinarily, he's a gracious guy, but he so resented the insults from Senator Brooks that his code of honor called for a duel, meaning we're going to shoot at each other. Okay, they still did that. Just not that long ago, like 150 years ago, we're going to go out in the field and we're going to shoot each other. All right. So, but in the South, one only fought with a social equal, and he did not see Charles Sumner as his social equal because it would lower, like to fight with this guy who's an abolitionist and says such horrible, awful things like one might hear in a bar. It was beneath him, and so in order to avenge his honor on May the 22nd, 1856. He just straight up walks into the Senate. Brooks was a congressman. He was a representative. He just walks into the Senate and begins to unmercifully pound Preston Brooks in the head with a cane until it breaks. You guys ever had a cane? They don't break easily. So he pounds Charles Sumner in the head with the cane, and Charles Sumner falls unconscious to the floor, bleeding. People just watching. Like, people were just watching. Who's in the right and who's in the wrong? What do you guys think? Should Preston Brooks have not used violence? Should Charles Sumner kept his mouth shut? What do you think? Both of these guys, this is totally and completely out of their character. Yeah, Charles Sumner, kind of a butthead, brash, not very nice. He's from Massachusetts. Preston Brooks, he's a gentleman. Like, he's a Southern gentleman who never really said or done anything hurtful. What is driving these two men to act so far out of their character? Well, why is this happening? Slavery. They just cannot agree over a political issue. Charles Sumner stoops to the level of basically using profanity in the Senate, like calling people names like you would call somebody out in public. All right, not a place where that should happen. And then Preston Brooks this is like attempted murder. Like, I don't know if you guys realize just how bad Charles Sumner gets messed up. Like, it affected his nervous system. He had to spend 3 years in rehabilitation in Europe, very costly to him, seeking treatment. So the injuries to his head and nervous system were very serious. So whenever something like this happens and a congressman or senator commits crimes, they don't really go to jail like you or I would. They do this thing called censure and then expulsion. Well, before they're able to do that, Preston Brooks, he resigns and he goes back to South Carolina. And he runs in the next election and he wins by a landslide. And when he gets back to South Carolina, how do you think he's greeted? Boo. Do you think he's greeted like that? He's greeted as a hero. When he gets to his home, he has like 200 canes leaned up against his porch as gifts that people brought him. Some of them lined with, have golden heads on them. You're our hero. You showed that Yankee what we do here. He was greeted as a hero. And people would send him canes because he broke his over the head of Charles Sumner. So, this Sumner-Brooks clash and the ensuing reactions to it just show how dangerously inflamed passions were becoming between the North and the South. So it's pretty ominous, that these two guys, Sumner, being a very cultured, well-spoken man, used such barroom bully language, and the gentlemanly Brooks employed the tactics and tools of a thug, just walking in and bang, So their emotion was displacing their thought. Emotion was displacing their rational thinking. So many people argue that the blows made against Charles Sumner on the head were among the first blows of the Civil War. Okay? I made this. It's funny. You should laugh. Just fake laugh. Come on. Yeah, thank you. That's Preston Brooks. Somebody has a different opinion than me, start caning them. All right. Okay. So the election of 1856. While bullets were still whirring about in Kansas, the Democrats met in Cincinnati, Ohio, to have their Democratic convention to choose who's going to be their presidential candidate for the election of 1856. President Pierce, they shied away from. He already kind of had his chance and showed he was pretty ineffective. Stephen A. Douglas was a good choice, but, he upset way too many people, too polarizing. And so the delegates finally choose a man by the name of James Buchanan. And it's Buchanan, not Buchanan, Buchanan. Okay, he would correct people if they said Buchanan. Buchanan. Muscular, white-haired, pretty tall, about 6 feet tall. Had a short neck and a protruding chin because he had an eye defect, and so he would look at you like he'd tilt his head when he looked at you because one of his eyes was messed up from an infection. Well-to-do, pretty wealthy guy. He was a lawyer from Pennsylvania. And the thing that really made him the most favorable to be the next president for the Democratic Party was that he was out of the country during the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And so he hadn't upset anybody. He didn't have any opinion. In fact, he didn't even have any thoughts on the matter, which is probably not a good thing. But he had no enemies, relatively. So, he's also rumored. This is rumor. It's totally unrelated to his ability as president, but he was also rumored to be the first homosexual president, as he was a lifelong bachelor, and he lived with a man by the name of Rufus King, who was vice president of the United States under Franklin Pierce. That's all. It's all. Some historians say it, some it's not a proven thing, but it's it's kind of an interesting thing. The Republicans, they came out and they chose Captain John C. Fremont, the so-called Pathfinder of the West. And the platforms were pretty different. As the Republican platform was all about the prevention of the extension of slavery, not abolition. That is different. The prevention of the extension of slavery. Where? Where do the Republicans not want to see slavery? That's right. All this gray area. All right. Slavery no more anywhere here. That is what their platform mainly revolves around. It's really what the Republican platform was created out of. Slavery. No more slavery. Extended. What about in Georgia? Can they have slavery according to the Republicans? Yeah, all these states that already have it, keep it. We're not trying to abolish it. The Republicans say we don't want to extend it. And that was the party platform. While Democrats declared, hey, we want popular sovereignty. It's the party of Stephen A. Douglas. If the people want it, we'll have it. Okay, so that's the two. So these people, when people show up at the election booth, they have to decide. They have these options. All right, the Democrat, we're going to use popular sovereignty, or the Republican, no slavery extension anymore. So that's kind of the options people have, and you can see that the majority of the nation went with the Democrat. All right, as the Republican was very much a sectional party. I don't even know if John C. Fremont was on the ballot in these southern states. Okay, it was a sectional party, not the Republican Party that we know today. Okay, so there was another party, as you can see, with Millard Fillmore, and that party that ran in this election was called the Know Nothings. You guys know what the Know Nothings were about? Remember them? They came out of, during this time, there's a massive influx of immigrants coming from, foreign countries. So the Know Nothing Party was spawned to be anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic, fearful of foreigners. Americans must rule America. That was their campaign slogan. But whatever, and so the Whig Party's they're pretty much dead, and the Whigs, what Whigs were left, would probably fall into Millard Fillmore's party, the Know Nothings. So it was a pretty ugly ugly campaign, mudslinging on both sides. Buchanan got made fun of for being a bachelor. Fremont was, they said he was a bastard, that he was born illegitimately. I don't know that any of it, well, Buchanan was a bachelor. I don't know about the bastard part. But the most harmful thing that they really said was a truthful thing, and that was that John C. Fremont was Catholic, and there was a very steep hatred of Catholicism in America in the 1850s. So, obviously, who wins? Old Buck. Old Buck wins. That's his nickname, Old Buck. He even said he wanted people to call him that, Old Buck. And he wins 174 to 114. Fillmore got 8 votes. He got Maryland. So why did the Republicans go down with such a horrible defeat? Many Northerners, the parties are beginning to split and fracture, and these splits and fractures are all occurring as a result of the issue of slavery. Okay, they're all splitting over slavery. And by the time the next presidential election rolls around, the Republican Party is unified and strong and has a very powerful, good candidate. And that candidate is Abraham Lincoln. Okay? All right. There's questions on that election. Okay. These two gentlemen here. The man on the left was the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. His name was Roger Taney, even though it's spelled Taney, but they pronounce it Taney. And this man is Dred Scott. The Dred Scott decision happened in March the 6th of 1857. Some people say these were the opening paper blasts of the Civil War. No violence occurs here, but it's all done on paper. The case is simple. Dred Scott, a black slave, lived with his master for 5 years in Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory. What does Illinois and Wisconsin Territory have in common? No slavery. But he's resided in those territories and states for 5 years. And when, with the help of some very interested abolitionists, he sued for his freedom on the basis of his residence on free soil. Does this make sense? He lived in a territory that was free. He should be free. Now, he himself is, obviously, he's illiterate. He has no money. Abolitionists pay for all this, okay, to cause problems for slave owners. So the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the case is called Dred Scott versus Sanford, which was his slave, his master. And the Supreme Court proceeded to take this very simple case and make it a very complex political issue. Roger Taney was the leader of the Supreme Court, and he is from Maryland. What is the state of Maryland's view on slavery? Was Maryland pro-slavery? Was there slavery in Maryland? Yes, Maryland had slavery. He is from Maryland. So, basically, this is what the Supreme Court rules. Dred Scott was a black slave. He is not a citizen of the United States. Therefore, he cannot even have access to courts. He can't sue anybody, as he's not an American. He's property. What does this mean? That since he is a slave and private property, that he can be taken anywhere into any territory and be held there in slavery. What does this mean for slavery? That it can exist anywhere. If let's say I'm a Tennessee guy and I feel like moving to New York City and I bring 200 slaves with me, are they still my property, still my slaves? according to this route. So then, therefore, does that mean that slavery can exist in New York? Yeah. Yeah, even though it's banned by the state of New York. No slavery in the state of New York. If I move there with my property and bring them with me, slavery then exists there. This is a massive setback for the abolitionist cause. And he used, the argument that Tawney says, he's like, hey, the Fifth Amendment clearly forbids Congress from depriving people their property without due process of law. He makes a good argument if you believe that people are property. So basically, the Dred Scott decision overthrows lots of stuff. Overthrows the entire Compromise of 1820 is unconstitutional because it says the federal government cannot prohibit slavery anywhere. Cannot be prohibited anywhere. Southerners were delighted by the Dred Scott decision. Northerners couldn't believe it. So this decision drives another lethal wedge between the North and the South. Northern abolitionists, infuriated by the setback of the Dred Scott decision. Okay? Questions? We'll stop there for today.